Phil Hellmuth Jr. just won the $10,000 World Series of Poker Super Turbo Bounty Bracelet event, giving him 17 World Series of Poker bracelets.
I mean, that's not a small amount.
The most of all time
Right.
by a decent margin.
Sure.
The question must be asked.
Okay.
Is Phil Hellmuth the best tournament poker player of all time?
Is he the GOAT? Well, there's got to be yeses and nos here, right? Like, it's not as easy as it sounds, because on one level, if you watch him play, it's really hard, I think, to say he's the best. And I think, except for Phil himself, universally, it would be amongst the high roller community that I think no one thinks Phil could compete at the $250K buy-in level against the best tournament players in the world right now.
I think you're right.
At the same point, is it possible that Phil is better at these large field events than essentially anyone else? And over the last 30 years, he's proven it?
Of course that's possible.
And that's maybe the question. Would that make you the greatest of all time if it was true? Maybe.
Let's narrow it down to some ways to look at this.
Okay.
Some metrics. So how would you identify qualifying traits of the greatest tournament poker player of all time? One would be results, of course.
Has to, like, your Hendon has to be at least pretty fucking impressive.
Right. One would also be skill in individual hands. Like what has he done in individual hands? Has he made impressive plays in individual hands?
Yes.
And the third one, which is I think the most hard to define and the most hard to see exactly what's going on when you're a viewer, is tournament strategy, which is kind of the underlying thing that makes tournaments different than cash games. Because I don't think anybody in the world would say that Phil Hellmuth is the best cash game player of all time.
I don't think Phil Hellmuth would say that.
I don't even think Phil Hellmuth would say that, and he's the biggest fan of Phil Hellmuth that I've ever heard about. So it's not that he has the best individual technical skill to play a hand, right? That's probably like Stephen Chidwick or something like that.
Right.
There's something special about his tournament strategy is the most likely explanation, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
It's weird because, again, I think if we put him up against the best tournament players right now, his tournament strategy wouldn't be good enough.
Yes,
so
but okay,
I have to push back on
Let's
that.
change that to large field multi-table tournament strategy because that's different than small field. I don't think anybody in their right minds would say that Joe Cata is going to beat the 250Ks either. But if I'm going to pick somebody for the main event this year that I get to put money on, it might be Joe Cata because he's so good at huge. And then, by the way, Joe Cata might be Phil Hellmuth's biggest competition for these giant multi-table tournaments.
Yeah, it's actually true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Negreanu maybe. I don't know. But yeah. Well, okay, there's another question to ask here, which is, so Phil's won 17 bracelets, right? And it's easy to think if you're new-ish to the game that 17 bracelets means a particular thing, i.e. it means you've won 17 large field events, essentially, right? Because right now in the World Series, there are almost no small events anymore, right?
No, it's like 5,000 player fields all the time.
I mean, of course, if you're talking about like an Omaha or a Stud 8 event, that's going to be smaller.
Right, and a 10K event is going to be smaller than a $1,500 event.
But even those things are pretty big. And also, Phil usually wins. Almost all of his bracelets are a no-limit hold'em anyway. And all the no-limit hold'ems are going to attract the most people. And Phil, by the way, doesn't win mostly the big buy-in no-limit hold'ems, right?
Yeah.
He's winning more like the $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 events, which is going to get more people. So on one level, you might say 17 bracelets, he must have buzzed through, if you're looking at the numbers this year anyway, 6,000 people each time. And that is not in any way true, right? To be very clear, right?
Right.
He won about half of those bracelets, actually more, 9 of those bracelets pre-Moneymaker. So I think that's something, but that means he's also won, 8?
Yeah.
Since, or maybe it's 7, but whatever it is, that's still unbelievable, right? That's an incredible thing.
It is impressive no matter how you look at it, no matter what you think about the man and his antics and his behavior and what he means to the poker community. It is impressive in one way or another, and you have to respect the longevity because it's not like there aren't players who have been playing as long as Phil, and those players don't have the same amount of bracelets as he does, right? Just because he won them before Moneymaker doesn't mean they don't count.
It's true, but at the same point, let me tell you the amount of entries in some of his wins before Moneymaker, just so you have a sense. $5,000 limit hold'em in 1992, 88 entrants.
Sure.
$2,500 no limit hold'em in 93, 173 entrants. 284 entrants also in 93. 69 entrants also in 93. Just to give you a sense of it, 170 entrants in 97 when he won a pot limit bracelet. 441 in 2001. Obviously, that's not a small field.
Yeah,
it ain't 5,000 players, right?
It's still impressive.
194 entrants in 2003. It feels like it's notable. 398 entrants also in 2003. This is just essentially pre-Moneymaker era also. Those are all the pre-Moneymaker era bracelets that I could find anyway. So, and I didn't get like his main event one. I think that had like, 400 or 500 players in that too. So it's just not the same though as like winning the Millionaire Maker 20 or 17 times. It's nothing like that.
Well, of
to
course,
be clear.
but nobody thinks that, right?
Well, I don't know. Like some people are newer to the game and may not have a sense of it, or may even think like a $1,500 event is going to have 2,000 players, even if it doesn't have 10,000. That's not the kinds of obstacles he was overcoming, just to be clear. And he has played essentially every event for the last 30 years too. I think that's important to note. If we had Negreanu or Ivy playing every event since 93, how many bracelets would they have won? I don't know.
Hard to say, but there is also a mental component to being able to play every event.
No question.
Like that, there's a skill there too. You can't diminish that.
Yep. And while I'm giving you all his results for, like all the small fields that he's won, he's also obviously won a bunch of big field events too. So for example, the one he just won, well, actually the Super Turbo Bounty only had 642 entrants. I just see that now, but he has won certainly many with four-figure, over 1,000 entries as well. And he's won 17 of these. It's impressive. Are we giving it more weight though, just because it's World Series tournaments?
Yes, it's the biggest brand in the world, and there is a somewhat stunning lack of diversity in his first place finishes. Looking at his Hendon mob, there are no EPTs, there are no WPTs, which is kind of odd.
That is really weird.
He's won a USPO event, which are like small field events. He won a 10K USPO event in 2023.
Yeah, for $200,000.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like very few people.
And then Hendon counts his high stake dual wins as first place finishes. Which,
cool. There were 88 people in that USPO event that he won, right?
Right. So it's kind of strange that his success comes so exclusively at the World Series of Poker in comparison to anything else. And I don't think he travels for the EPT and plays all those things, but he's definitely played a lot of WPTs, and I know that.
Yeah.
So
he used to play all the WPTs. I don't know if he does anymore, but I mean, those are $10,000. Actually, they aren't anymore. They used to be 10K buy-in events.
Another 3,500.
Yeah, 35 to 5,000, right? So actually, that's going to let in more, but that's going to keep out the Weekend Warrior types, except the satellite winners, right? As opposed to like a 1,500 at the World Series, which is all the Weekend Warriors.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of good players in them, of course.
Of course, but you are much less likely to run into them. They're going to, they're going to run into all the landmines it takes, and in a WPT, there's going to be a little less of those.
All right, so let's answer the question as best we can here. And I think the answer is not going to be an exact answer.
Sure, of
right?
course.
But I think there is definitely a case that Phil Hellmuth is the greatest large field multi-table tournament player of all time.
Okay, and just to say one thing about this that we haven't mentioned yet is there's a strong belief in the poker community that he basically gets amateurs to play weirdly against him with all his antics, and that's part of what makes him great.
Yes, and I think he also knows exactly how to react to amateurs in every situation in a subtle way, whatever he wants to call it, white magic, whatever it is. That the type of shit that really doesn't work against Stephen Chidwick and Alex Fox, and that really does work against Joe, who's only playing the main event and doesn't care about poker that much.
So my take is, ultimately, I don't think he's the greatest tournament player of all time for a few reasons. Number one, I mean, watching him play the tournament strategy stuff is sometimes tough to watch. He's clearly not thinking on the level of the Chidwicks and the Bonomo's. It isn't like he's a Bonomo who can change his game for the amateurs and play better there. That would be impressive. We don't see that, right? I just see him playing the same game against everyone, and I think that's problematic. But also, winning 17 bracelets is very impressive. By the way, also World Series of Europe main event bracelet.
Yeah.
In fact,
which is an impressive bracelet. That's a tougher field.
For sure. But that's but the way we're talking about it, we're like, well, he's not one of the best tournament players. He couldn't play at the highest level. So it's like saying, is the guy who's the best 5,100 player in the world the actual best cash game no limit player in the world? I'd say, no, he's not. The guys
disagree.
who play are bigger. And Tom Dwan is much more likely to be better than that guy. Go ahead.
I disagree completely with what you're saying.
Oh, really?
Because I think it's a different skill to navigate a huge field than it is to navigate the high roller fields, which are much smaller fields.
If you're going to be the greatest of all time, though,
that's why it depends on
to be both.
Who can name who can.
Well, I would guess that some of the high roller players.
A guess. That's not helping. Nobody helps anybody with a guess.
I don't understand what you're doing right now. You said at the beginning we can't know the answer to this, so all we're doing is guessing. Why are you making it sound like me saying I would guess? I
think what is going on here is that I'm reacting to what we both do, but you're doing it too much right now, which is shitting on Hellmuth because he's an asshole.
No, I'm saying that. No, it's not that. I'm saying that I think that winning the World Series of poker. Like, that is one incredible skill for sure to have that. That does, to me, that alone does not make you the greatest tournament player of all time. That's a huge thing to say. And I would take the guys who are clearly better at tournaments than him, which have essentially always existed in every era that he's been around. Maybe not in the first 10 years when I wasn't aware of poker. Fine, from 93 to 2003, pre-Moneymaker. But since then, he's essentially, except by himself, no one else has really thought of him as the greatest tournament player. People say he's the claim that is made is he's the best large field tournament player. That's not exactly the same thing. I think you'd want to have all the skills, and maybe no one does, but I think watching him play, I would say relatively poorly against the really good players, to me, makes it much harder for me to say he's the best of all time. I don't think that's me shitting on him because he's a dick. That's really not what it is. It's not me coming after him.
All right, let me lay out my case for him being the best multi-table tournament large field player of all time, at least.
Go ahead.
Let's say he gets crushed by the good players. If Alex Foxen gets seated on his left on day one of a 1500, that's obviously unfortunate for anybody, but for Phil, it ruins his whole thing. It's possible, I'm not saying I have evidence for this, but it's possible that Phil can extract the most out of amateurs of any player in the world. Mm-hmm. And that is so much more valuable in these large fields than being able to beat Alex Foxen. Because you're not going to have to beat Alex Foxen very often. That's not going to come up. So if he can get more out of the amateurs than Alex Foxen can, and then Stephen Chidwick can, then that is much more valuable than being able to beat Stephen Chidwick or Alex Foxen in the large multi-table fields.
Right, but you're not always in those fields unless you choose to only be in those fields, right?
Right. So I would never say he's the greatest tournament player of all time, bar none. But I might say,
okay. So after me, you're really coming after me pretty hard for saying he wasn't, and now you're kind of on my side. But please continue.
I might say that he's the greatest multi-table large field tournament player of all time.
Right. That would be the thing. That would be the claim, as opposed to just the greatest of all time. And that's the real question we're talking about.
I think the only competition is Joe Cada. And Joe Cada doesn't have as many years, and he doesn't have as many shots at it.
Certainly not.
But his resume is absurd. Just look it up.
It is very impressive. Joe Cada is the only other guy who comes to mind for me also. I guess I mentioned Negreanu as a possibility too. Negreanu does pretty well on these big field events.
Yeah.
But I don't know if anyone... I mean, Sean Deeb every year seems to do great, but a lot of
that
is the more mixed game,
smaller fields,
events, different kind of stuff. Playing the 50K Poker Players
He's obviously very good, but I don't think he's in the same category as Hellmuth and Cada in these large fields.
I think you're probably right. It's possible that Hellmuth and Cada care enough about trying to win the thing, or like the other players are care enough about ICM and trying to make the quote right decision every time, as opposed to sometimes throwing it out into what's this amateur doing literally right now, and how do I react to this right now, which means I have to fold, even though everything in the world says I'm supposed to call. Phil Hellmuth will always make that fold, right? Sometimes to his detriment, but he will always do it. And I think the Alex Foxens of worlds won't. Now, maybe over time that makes them more money, but maybe that helps Phil in these fields specifically against the amateurs sometimes.
Yeah. So he's got a case. He's got a case for
he has a case.
Sure.
Of course he has a case. No one said he didn't have a case.
Well,
why did you come after me so hard, bro?
Because you are too mean to Phil Hellmuth.
I am not.
I'm kidding. There's no such thing as being too mean to Phil Hellmuth.
Thank you.